Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Today, I have Dan Winter here with me today, and I'm really excited to be talking with Dan because he and I have a lot in common when it comes to our love of communication, negotiation, and we do something very, very similar. Welcome, Dan.
Pleasure to be here.
I would love for you to share with my audience, like, the work that you do and that you're so passionate about and who you work with.
Sure. I'm a leadership and executive team coach with Altus Growth Partners. We're a boutique consulting firm across the USA, Canada. We also do quite a bit of international work. And I work with companies and leaders and executive teams that are struggling to scale or have scaled and are struggling. They're not delivering what they need. Very often you'll see a leader who's gone from managing 15 people is now managing 100, and they don't need to manage 100, they need to lead 100. Or an executive team where the individuals are good at leading their function, but they're not leading at the company level. And the CEO and the CFO are making all the hard decisions. Lots of times we work in strategy, how to turn that strategy into clear, difficult decisions, how to then move that into implementation throughout the whole organization. And occasionally things that look and feel like mediation because things aren't working the way they want and relationships get pretty broken. And we work both in that very rational and also in that very human space.
I feel like anytime you work with humans, there will be conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So it's always good for people like you to be in the world, Dan, so that you can help people resolve their conflict and also teach them how to resolve the conflict, right? Not just come in and be the mediator, but teach them how to mediate themselves, basically.
Yeah, and that's one of the keys for us is we pay attention to the conversations that are working, the conversations that aren't working, and the conversations that are missing. And we work with our clients to learn how to recognize and have those conversations, even when it's very uncomfortable.
Now, I would love to sort of like get into the topic at hand, which revolves around a very particular kind of conversation when it comes to the workplace. So, Dan, if you want to just introduce my listeners to the topic that we'll be talking about today, I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think about negotiations as getting alignment about the future we'll have together, even if it's separate futures. And we think about that M&A, partnerships, big contracts, but most of the negotiation I see in organizations is these little micro negotiations day by day between a manager and an employee about the deliverables, between executives on budget, between executives on strategy. And we see breakdowns in that communication that lead to failures within the organization all the time. And a lot of our work is helping them really see where the breakdowns come from, what it takes to make a complete request, how to recognize when someone's really committed to doing it and capable, and how to negotiate and manage when it's become clear that original promise can't be fulfilled.
So let's talk about, let's start from the very beginning, which is about the breakdown in communication. What do you typically see in these micro negotiations? Like, what things lead to the breakdowns?
Yeah, the biggest one, we think about complete requests. And most of the time we see incomplete request. And a complete request has clear conditions of satisfaction, right? I want this, etc. They also want to have a time of fulfillment. And we see very often people are very, very fuzzy about when something's going to get done. And that often leads to a breakdown. And then the two things that we see missed most often, shared background of obviousness. There's all this stuff that's in my head that I assume everyone else knows, and they don't. And we help our clients get very specific. And sometimes that'll feel to an employee like they're being micromanaged or talked down to. And so you have to position it really clearly. It's like, you and I haven't worked together on this. I do my podcast, you do your podcast. I have a whole bunch of assumptions about equipment. I have a whole bunch of assumptions about other things, but you and I still need to talk because you may do it differently than me. If we'd done this podcast every day for a year, we would not have to have that conversation. But I see people miss the background of obviousness all the time. And then the other one to really pay attention to is, for the sake of what? Why am I asking you to do this? And I'll see a request, a manager goes to an employee and says, I need this data by Friday. And they get a spreadsheet. And what they were actually trying to do is to put together a proposal with a recommendation for the leadership team by Monday. And getting the data doesn't help me. I need to tell a story. And so telling the employee, here's what I'm going to do with it. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. That also allows the employee to say, I'm actually an expert in this. And what you requested is probably not the best thing to have requested. Here's what I'm going to recommend we do differently. And so that for the sake of what? That why piece of it. And then for leaders, what I see happen, they'll get alignment and they all understand in the meeting why they're doing it. And then that work percolates down as requests down through the organization. And the people who are actually doing the work don't know the why, so they just focus on whether or not they're doing the task.
So I have so many questions because you have so much, you gave us so much wonderful things out there. Let's start beginning at, okay, you talked about timelines. And so my question to you is it that the person who, let's say if I'm giving you an assignment, right, mm-hmm. and I'm your boss, is it that I'm not clear with timelines and when the deadline is, or is it that I give you the deadline and then you become unclear as to whether you're going to meet the deadline or not?
There can be a handful of breakdowns that we see frequently. One, we have the nature of being a professional is your ability to make and manage commitments. And a lot of employees think their job is to say yes to their manager. And they end up stretched too thin. They don't have the time, they don't have the capacity for everything. We have cultures where we've said, what's your goal? And they'll tell us and say, are you committed to that? It's like, no, it's just a goal. So, we kind of pound our chests and we chant about the North Star we're aiming for, but we know that we always slip. And so it's acceptable to slip deadlines. We also have situations where, because you aren't necessarily an expert in having done this before, you don't actually know how long it's going to take. So if I say it's going to take, by next Friday, you're thinking that must be doable. And part of this, I think, comes from actually the education system. So by the time you hit the workforce, you've spent 12, 16 years in school. And schools work hard to give a curriculum that between all of your classes is doable. And your teachers actually coordinate. You don't have a teacher who gives you 50 hours of homework every week. And so you're trained to think that just because someone says I should do this, it must be doable. And when you move into the professional world, you need to actually know your capacity, know what you're able to do, and stretch a muscle that a lot of organizations don't let people stretch, which is the ability to decline a request. To be able to say, I can't do that. Or if I can do that, I need help, or I need coaching, or I need a partner. But most people just don't know how to have that side of the conversation to manage the request coming in, to make it doable and to fit the timeline.
I love this piece, Dan, because not only should people have to advocate for themselves and say, I can't meet that deadline, but also to be able to request the time it needs to actually analyze what is being asked of them, right? If I say you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you have no idea what that means, you only know what the deliverables are, you don't know what it takes to get there, you should be able to ask and say, let me look at this project, let me get back to you tomorrow to give you an accurate timeline of what I think I can do based on what I know and what this project actually entails.
Yeah, and you're putting your finger on something that's critical. We talk about a committed customer, and I am committed to the success of the performer. And so I'm not just delegating and abdicating. I want to stay actively involved. And the first step is, when you say yes, I need to actually assess how trustworthy is that yes. And I listen for 4 responses. Accepting it, right? I promise to do this. Declining it. I promise not to do it. Negotiating. I can't do this, but I can do that. And then commit to commit. I need to think about this. Give me 24 hours. I need to check with my team to see what their workload looks like and who's on vacation. And I will get back to you in a specific timeline with a commitment or a decline or a negotiation. But we'll see often in organizations, right? We make a decision in a meeting, it rolls down 2 layers. And I've seen this where people are planning for a big push on a project and they aren't accounting for summer vacations. No one knows when the key engineers are not going to be in the office, and they've committed, but they haven't actually checked with the performers to see if it's really doable. What we see in a lot of organizations is what we think of as anesthetizing promises. Things like, I'll try. I'll put it on my list. I'll get to it next week. I see how important that is. I'm gonna put it at the top of my list. None of those as a customer count as a response, right? That just creates organizational fuzz. And the reason we call it anesthetizing promises is because it's really uncomfortable to have the honest conversation about whether or not you can do it. And so if we can pick one of those soft phrases, that pain goes away until there's a real breakdown. And I've seen organizations literally waste $1 billion because no one could say no, and everything that went into the planning system was wrong. And all the managers knew it was wrong, but they didn't want to be the one who got fired. And what they were waiting for was one person's work or one team's work to get so far behind it was obvious. And that person would get fired, and everyone else would now be given a gift of more time while we reset the project. But every person knew that it was off schedule. And we see that frequently, that we're off schedule, and the people who know it just aren't willing to speak up, or the people who need to hear it aren't willing to listen.
So my question is, how do we handle people who, while the communication, they may be able to communicate their needs, they may be able to advocate, hey, I need to think about this. What if you have a real power imbalance? When I say real, I mean someone who actually exerts power and says, I'm your boss. I need it on Friday. No excuses. I don't care what you have going on. I don't care what your team is doing. I don't care that people are on vacation. It has to be done because I say. So how do you coach people to deal with someone who is exerting their boss power?
Often that comes up in individual coaching around leadership style. And my first question is, how's that working for you? I often see that move, and what it's doing is it's getting results today, but it's chewing up the team. And I think about it like, are you actually squeezing orange juice? Or are you growing oranges for next season? Are you just counting revenue and ignoring the cost? And so we'll sit down and we'll really look at holistically, what does great leadership look like, and what does a healthy team look like? And you can make short-term trade-offs. I've had leaders, and I respect it. They say, we can push and they will create more capacity. It's like, great. And are you keeping track of when they're going to burn out? Are you keeping track of, are they excited about this? Do they have a reward? Do they get recognition? Or are you just demanding? And that can be a huge problem. The other thing is we think about 4 conversations all the time. And often we see teams aren't clear about which conversation they're in, and that leads to huge problems. And 3 of them are conversations for possibilities. I want to brainstorm. I want to create lots of ideas that I could then put together into a proposal and move to a conversation for decision making. And then once we've made decisions, I need to move that into conversation for action. And that's where the request piece really comes in. Across all 3 of those is a conversation for relationship. And what you're talking about there is a breakdown in the conversation for relationship. And I've told leaders that, your only job as a leader is to make decisions and allocate resources. All the information you need for that is in the hands of your performers. They're the experts. They know what they can do. And so if you don't create a culture with open communication for you to hear bad news, you're just accepting failure. And we actually talk about this in terms of breakdowns. And most people think when there's a breakdown, and breakdown's just, I was expecting this future and I don't think this future is going to happen, right? I thought I was going to get it done by Thursday. It turns out I'm not going to get it done by Thursday. I thought we were going to have $5 million in revenue. It turns out we've got orders for 10 million, and now I've got factory capacity problems. We think about those breakdowns, and most people will view a breakdown as something to be ashamed of, right? I've made a mistake. I made a commitment I can't meet, and we go into that space. We think about breakdowns as a celebration. We were off track, and we just discovered we're off track, and now we can do something about it. Before, we were blind to the problem. Now we as leaders can actually do something. And so I want a culture where people are comfortable announcing breakdowns. I think this may be a problem. I'm taking this on. I don't know if I'll be able to do it by Friday. I think I can. I'll let you know Wednesday if I'm on track. Right? Anything in that space so they can keep that conversation up. And when I said conversations that are present and working, conversations that are present and not working, the conversations that are missing, it's often that midpoint check where, you made a commitment, but you were assuming that you could get information from other people. You were assuming that a vendor would give you something. You were assuming, did all those things happen? And if they didn't, let me know if we can recover or if we have to change the promise that you made. And I see companies that just discover that so late that there's no recovery plan.
I think what you're saying is really important because you mentioned if you can't meet the deadline on Friday, let them know on Wednesday. So frequently people wait to the very last minute until the deadline moment to say, we were hoping, we were waiting, right? All the things. And you show up and then you wonder why there's this fury coming your way when you let them know at the time of the deadline, we can't meet it. Whereas if you let them know in advance or 48 hours in advance, whenever you find out, right? As soon as you find out, even if you think to yourself, maybe that shipment will come in and maybe we'll make that deadline, I think it's really critical to keep the communication transparent with your boss to let them know, hey, like you said, we just discovered this and we're going to talk about it. Because if you let someone know at the time of the deadline, it's going to be a much bigger shock.
Yeah. The other one that we see frequently, the leader asks for something from the employee. I need it by Friday. The employee does it. They upload it to the team site. They never told the leader they did it. So the leader comes in Monday and says, hey, where's that report that I needed? It's been there the whole time. And so teaching the performers to let the manager know, I've actually done it. I think I have done it to your standards. I've met the conditions of satisfaction, right? I've done what I thought you asked me to do. And you can now look at it as a leader and say, yep, you nailed it. But I've seen times where the report's been done for 2 weeks and the leader's sitting there frustrated because they haven't gotten an email telling him it's done.
That is interesting. That would be considered, I think, training people to what they consider to over communicate. Yep. Because what they think is obvious, just like you said, it's in their head, right? In my head, I'm thinking I did it, but I didn't actually communicate to the person. And I might be thinking, well, they should obviously check in, wherever they're supposed to be checking, but that's not exactly, the boss cannot read the employees' minds, or they may be waiting for that extra email. And if that email doesn't come, the communication just never happens, right?
Yep. And it's that background of obviousness. If you and I have worked together a lot, great. But if you've transferred over, I've transferred over to your group, I'm still operating on the background of obviousness of my previous manager. And you may have very different expectations and standards. You may have a different way of doing things. And we need to have that conversation to navigate. And it's okay for it to be iterative, right? We really declare we're in a learning space and we're going to have breakdowns and we're going to learn fast. And the faster we see the breakdown, the faster we can learn, and we can learn the moves with each other. We also could spend a little bit of time up front just getting really clear about how we're going to work together. I jokingly once told my team when I was leading a 25-person organization, I told my managers in their reviews, you need to get better at reading my mind. Which just said, we need to have this conversation more often. I also told them, if I ever make a request and it seems like a stupid request, I probably didn't say it well, please call me. that don't assume that just because I asked for it, that I've communicated it well, or if you think it's stupid, then you may not be hearing it clearly. So anything that's unclear isn't your fault. Assume anything that's unclear is my fault because I'm committed to your success as a performer, not to making my life simple and easy and fast.
I think there's like some wisdom in basically always following the rule of slowing down to speed up, right?
Yep.
So slowing down in this particular case means having, like you said, the conversation where you and I get on the same page about what do we each expect of one another, or how do we work together? Meaning, like you said, if I finish a project, that you expect an email, right? To have those initial conversations to state the obvious. Like, this is my obvious. My obvious is when you finish things, send me an email, right? That sort of thing.
And lots of times the slowing down isn't the most effective or efficient version. So one version of slowing down, we have weekly project reviews, and I pull up the Gantt chart. All the people who are doing the work report out status. 95% of the stuff is on track, and it's wasting 95% of the time, and everyone's tuning out.
Right.
I want to train my team that they're watching their commitments, they're managing their commitments, they're clear on the conditions of satisfaction, and they are speaking up as soon as they see a problem. And so we can have that meeting and just do a quick, is everything on track? And if there's anything off track, let's pull a little bit of group intelligence to figure out, can we recover, or do we need to all change our plans because that's critical? And now we can go back to our jobs. And people are seeing that as a very active conversation where their time makes a difference versus I'm doing email and a project review waiting for someone to call my name out.
Right. And no one is listening while each person is taking their turn. Right.
Yeah. And we think about, and again, we've seen this in executive teams where they're really just looking at their function. And they end up making the CEO or the CFO be the person who holds the story. And you'll see it in project management, and you'll see it all the way up at the executive team. And we teach leadership teams that they need to be accountable for the things that they do, but they need to feel responsible for all the commitments of the team. And that means if I see the marketing team is not doing what I need and I'm the engineer, I speak up. If sales isn't getting what they need from engineering, they speak up. As opposed to, well, my team's doing their part and we've identified who's at fault. And we'll see that move frequently. So I want individuals and I want teams to feel responsible for the overall success of the promises, not just their tasks.
Right. And let's talk a little bit, let's go back to what you mentioned earlier, and we kind of touched upon it, but I would love to dig a little bit deeper into assumptions. Yep. Right. And you said, you can't read my mind. But the question is, what I want you to sort of explain to my listeners, how can they recognize that they're making assumptions as they're going along the way? Because a lot of times people don't even realize they've assumed things.
Yep. One of the big moves for a customer, just like I'm listening for, is there actually a promise here or not? How trustworthy is that promise? And trust is one of those topics that can feel very dangerous to touch on, because we think about trust as character, and we think about it a little bit differently. Character is one version of trust, but you've got questions like, does this person have the capacity? Do they have the skills? Can they manage their network of performers? So I, as a VP, can call anyone in my group and they will immediately do something. Someone 2 levels down asks someone to do something and it takes 3 weeks before it gets on their list. And so can they manage their network of performers? Can they actually deliver this reliably? Do I have confidence that they even understand what I'm asking for? And if any of those are in question, I, as a customer, want to have a conversation to make sure that it's clear and offer support if needed. And so a simple one I'll do when I ask someone to do something, I'll say, what's your initial thought about what about this is going to be most difficult? And if they say, no, it seems pretty straightforward, I'm going to say, I'm pretty sure you don't understand what this request is then, because you should have at least 2 things of this should be hard for you. I know your performance. I know your skills. You aren't clear. I don't trust your promise when you say it should be straightforward. And so I want to have you come in tomorrow with a project plan and let me know who are the players you're talking to include on the project. And I just want to see tomorrow how you're thinking and approaching it so I can give you some extra coaching. I then want to probably check in with you midweek because I want to see what you're doing with it. And at any time you hit a wall, call me. And so I'm assessing how trustworthy that promise is for a variety of capabilities and reasons, and adjusting my leadership and my communication accordingly, and doing it in a way that's not shameful, right? It's fair to say I don't trust you on this because I know how overwhelmed you are with everything else. I don't know if you have the capacity for it. You have the intention, but not the capacity.
So is the assumption there that I would be assuming, I guess as the client, I'm just going to assume that you're trustworthy because you say you are? Is that the assumption, or what's the assumption in that scenario?
I believe everyone's honorable, but whether I trust their promise is an assessment I have to make based on what I know about that person, what I know about the work. And some of that comes with history, and some of that comes with experience. And so thinking about, again, first time we work on something together, I just want to be clear as a leader, I'd like to check in with you a few times because, one, my thinking about what I need may evolve as I see what you do, right? So I was asking for this, but once I see your first draft, I may change the direction on it, or I may get a new direction from up top. Or two, there's things that I know how to do that you don't, right? I worked in an HR group, and a lot of HR is moving numbers around. And when I interviewed a new HR person, one of the interview questions I'd ask is, do you know the Excel function VLOOKUP? And that allows you to match spreadsheets. If you don't know that, you're going to spend 40 hours on a weekend manually moving data. If you do know it, it takes you about 3 minutes. And if they didn't know it, first thing on their development plan was to go talk to my person who knew spreadsheets really well and learn the function. And the first couple of times you try to do it, ask her if she can watch your screen for you, because it's going to save you a ton of time. And I learned to ask that question because I saw people wasting so much time. I ask people, given what we've talked about, who's the expert you're going to turn to for coaching and advice? No, I've got this. I promise you're going to need some expertise. You're going to need some advice. Here's the senior individual contributor. I don't have the time and the bandwidth to meet with you. This person knows this work. They've been doing it for 2 years. Check in with them a couple of times and see if they have any insights. So I'm looking at my experience with you, saying I still trust you, but I want to make sure you have the resources you need. And I'll tell people, if this takes more than 2 hours, you're missing something, come to me. Because I think this is a 2-hour request. Either I'm missing something, I've asked for something way bigger than it should be, or you've got a learning piece that I need to help you with. And so I will literally tell them, I think this is a 2-hour request for this information. And that's helping me figure out, is it a trustworthy promise, and giving them a chance to reflect back. I made a promise and now I need to change it.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about when assumptions break down, right? So someone has made an assumption, it was wrong, and now you have to clarify it. So how does one go about clarifying like an assumption that's broken and it's in the middle of some project, right? So now they're like, oh my goodness, like I did not realize, they did not understand me, or I didn't understand what they said, right? So talk a little bit about how to do the repair once you realize that assumption was made inadvertently.
Part of this starts with kind of culture and the ground rules that we operate from. And so one of my colleagues has a great phrase: the bigger the promise, the bigger the breakdowns. So we're going to go into this assuming there's going to be breakdowns, and we're going into new territory. It's okay to have breakdowns. In fact, we're going to expect it because we're going to take steps, and the world will show up differently than we expect. And our agreement is, when someone sees a breakdown or thinks there might be a breakdown, they make it visible. And our first move is to celebrate. And I had a leadership team, whenever there was a breakdown, they said an F word that is probably not the best F word to say in the business environment. And they took that and they changed it to fascinating, right? When they saw a breakdown, it's like, fascinating. We thought it was going to take this long and it took longer. I want to get curious about that. What's going on here? The other thing I've seen, and I love this one, I had a leader who said, I don't do projects, I do experiments. If I put a project plan together, people get very emotionally tied to the project plan. If I say this is an experiment, then I can learn at any stage and make an adjustment. And so there's some culture pieces to this. And then just practicing, right? We go through this conversation every Monday. Someone is telling us there's a breakdown. They get help and we move on, as opposed to that shame and blame and who's going to get fired. I have a number of people. This is a weird dynamic. I love it when people come to me for help, right? I really enjoy it. I like helping other people be successful. But when I ask other people for help, I feel ashamed. And I was like, help me understand this. And I will tell people, why are you not giving that person the gift of feeling good about helping you? Right? We really do look at culture. And a big piece of our work, and it's not always obvious to our clients, but sometimes we'll make it very obvious, is moods. What's the mood that people are bringing? We think about moods as kind of the background music of your life. Moods are a story about the future, and they break into two big categories. Opening moods, which move me into action, and closing moods, which keep me stuck. And a closing mood, you do something, I don't like it, and I'm resentful. And I spend all of my time talking about how you made mistakes and how my life is unfair, etc. An opening mood may be ambitious. I don't like what happened, but I can do something about it. Or just acceptance. I can't do anything about that, but I got a whole bunch of other things I can do something about. And so I always want to think about what's the mood for the team, what's the mood for the individual, and where they are in a stuck mood, what can we do to help them move to a point where they can choose a mood that will help them create the future they want, as opposed to just feeling bad about the future they see.
I find that interesting because, like, in mediation, your open mood and closed moods, for me, translates to focusing on past actions versus focusing on future actions, right? Yep. And so it sounds like the open moods are focusing on how can we fix this? How can we move on? And having a closed mood is let's focus on all the bad things that happened and how they made me feel really terrible and how it affected everybody terribly, right? And so I think that's a great way to fit.
Yeah, and the closed moods not only don't help a company, right? If I'm a company, I'm an organization, I'm a leader, all I can do is move forward. I can't change the past. And so I want my organization to be moving towards the future with a sense of efficacy that they can make a difference and that there's a positive possibility. The more they stay stuck, they're not performing at their best and they're not living a life that they want to live, right? Ultimately, we want people to be taking care of the things they care about. And I promise you don't care about being resentful towards me. You care about whether you're doing a great job, whether you're working for a manager that brings out your best, whether you're treated with dignity and respect. When you do have troubles, do you get support? And can you showcase your gifts by working with other people who may have other gifts to make you even more successful, right? One of the things we'll talk about, no one's perfect, but a team can be. And so, I tend to not like project management. I tend to not like details. I can do it if I have to. I worked with a finance organization back in corporate for 10 years. And every time they asked me to be in charge of something, I'd say, great, I want a controller to co-lead this project. Because they love spreadsheets, they love details. But when they got stuck, they didn't know how to get unstuck. I'm great at getting unstuck. And so we were great partners because I was incredibly transparent about what I'm not great at. And this gets back to the trust. I'm going to announce to my team, don't trust me for these things because it is not the thing I'm best at. I want to get better, or I'm not great at it. I'm never going to get better. But come to me for these things because I love doing that more than anything else. And now they can watch my back. They can make offers without feeling like they're insulting me. And they can come to me for help really fast because they know I've got that expertise. And so we're speeding up that learning cycle for an organization by taking out the shame and increasing the communication.
Yeah, so it's interesting because shame and blame does something to your brain where it basically keeps you stuck, and it doesn't help the organization move forward, just like you said. Because if you are feeling shamed and blamed, then you're going to constantly have like the looping thoughts,
Yep.
right? The repetitive thoughts of like, what could I have done? What should I have done? Or what should I be doing now to fix this shame and blame? So that does not actually, it's not conducive to an individual to be able to think, how can we like move forward faster? Like you said, more
Yeah.
efficiently, more effectively. It actually is like slowing down the effective process because now you're having someone ruminate on how did I get here?
And a couple of pieces to that. When I said we pay attention to the conversations that are present, that's not just what you and I are saying. That's the conversation in my head. That's the conversation I'm bringing from my parents when I was 7, right? All of that showing up into the conversation you and I are having, but it's completely invisible, and it may be invisible to me. And so working in that space and pulling some of that out, and again, it's making visible the background of obviousness that all of us have, but we don't talk about very well. But it gets in the way of really great results. And the other thing that we watch for in moods and that piece of shame, the way your brain works, when you are afraid, there's a part of your brain that activates and a part of your brain that doesn't activate.
Yep.
And shame is part of that. So you literally get less intelligent
Yep.
when you're in that shame mode. And I, as a leader, never want my people to be less intelligent. And so I'm always watching mood. And if the mood's going the wrong way, let's stand up, let's go take a walk, let's get a cup of coffee, let's reconnect as people and reconnect in our success and what we care about each other. And let's come back into this problem, as opposed to, I can see you're contracting, I can see you're frustrated. I don't think either of us is having the conversation we want to have. So let's go connect our own relationship, and then let's come back and have the conversation we want to have.
I love that. That's fabulous. It's brilliant because the happier your team is, the smarter they will be. And it's not meaning like they will like become smarter in knowledge they don't have. You will utilize 100% of the knowledge and capacity that they have if they are happier, and you will lose it if you keep them in a place of like depression, sadness, anger, bitterness, like all the negative things. So I love that you say, like, hey, you'll have the smartest team if you keep them happy. That's a great note, Don. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here. If someone would like to reach out to you, to work with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find us at Altus Growth Partners. We've got a website. It's got all of us backgrounds on our work, some examples of work that we've done. And you've also got a link there to our podcast, Missing Conversations, which is interviews with leaders and some consultants on the conversations that are missing or the conversations that have made a huge difference in their success.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dan. And thank you to the listeners who tuned in once again. And until next time.
It's an absolute pleasure.